The day began like any other, with the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through the curtains. The protagonist, a person in their late 20s, had been feeling restless for weeks. Work was stressful, life felt repetitive, and there was a quiet emptiness that seemed to grow with each passing day. They had always enjoyed music casually, humming along to the radio, or listening to songs during a commute, but something deeper was missing. It was a longing they could not quite describe. One afternoon, while walking through the city streets, they heard a sound that made them pause. It was coming from a small music store tucked between two larger shops, almost hidden from the bustling street. The notes floated out onto the pavement, soft and delicate, but full of emotion. It was a piano, playing something the protagonist had never heard before, yet it felt strangely familiar. The music pulled them closer, and without thinking, they stepped inside. The store was cozy, with wooden shelves lined with sheet music, CDs, and books about music history. Behind the counter, an older man with kind eyes smiled warmly. The piano in the corner played on, as if welcoming the visitor. The protagonist wandered through the aisles, listening, captivated by the sound. The piece was gentle, yet it stirred something deep inside them. They felt a sudden rush of emotions, nostalgia, longing, hope, and sadness, all at once. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. The older man noticed their reaction and said softly, "You like it, don't you? That's Chopin. It's one of his nocturnes. Many people find peace in it." The protagonist nodded, unsure of how to respond. They had heard of classical music before, but it had never meant much to them. This was different. The music seemed to speak directly to their soul. They spent hours in the store that day, listening to different pieces, asking questions, and reading about the composers. Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, name carried a history and a depth they had never imagined. The protagonist realized that each composition was more than just notes on a page. Each piece told a story, carried emotions, and reflected the life and struggles of its creator. It was as if the music had a language of its own, one that could express what words often could not. Over the next few days, protagonists found themselves returning to the music store. They bought a few recordings and started listening at home. Each day, they discovered something new. A certain chord would make them smile. A gentle melody would bring tears to their eyes. The powerful symphony would fill them with awe. The music became a refuge, a place where they could escape the stress and monotony of everyday life. It was the first time in months that they felt truly alive. Friends noticed the change too. The protagonist was more patient, more reflective, and surprisingly cheerful. Conversations about music replaced idle chatter about work or the weather. They shared what they had learned about the composers, their lives, and the stories behind the compositions. People were intrigued, some even inspired to listen themselves. It was as if the music had a ripple effect, slowly touching everyone around them. One evening, while listening to a recording of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the protagonist felt something shift inside. The sadness and restlessness that had been a constant presence seemed to ease. They closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. Each note carried a piece of history, a reflection of human emotion and experience. It was comforting to know that people had felt similar emotions centuries ago, and that these feelings could still be expressed through music today. They began keeping a journal, noting down pieces that moved them the most. Some were serene and calming, others intense and dramatic. Each entry included thoughts about why the piece mattered, how it made them feel, and what it reminded them of. Slowly, a list began to form the 35 essential pieces that they felt connected to deeply. It was not just a collection of music. It was a map of their emotional journey, a way to understand themselves better as days turned into weeks. The protagonists started experimenting with listening in different ways. Sometimes they would close their eyes and focus only on the music, imagining the scenes or stories it painted. Other times, they would play the music in the background while drawing, writing, or simply relaxing. Each session was different, revealing new layers and emotions. It became clear that classical music was not just entertainment. It was nourishment for the soul. There were moments of frustration too. Some pieces were complex and hard to follow, and the protagonist struggled to connect with them at first. But with patience, research, and repeated listening, understanding grew. They learned to appreciate the subtlety of a soft note, the power of silence between chords, the way tension and resolution could create a journey within a few minutes. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and empathy. Through this exploration, protagonists realized that music could teach more than just technical skills. It could teach resilience, hope, and emotional awareness. Listening to a piece composed in difficult times or under personal struggle gave insight into the strength of the human spirit. It was a reminder that emotions, even the painful ones, were part of life and could be transformed into something beautiful. By the end of the first part of this journey, protagonist had changed. They were no longer restless or disconnected. There was a sense of purpose, a connection to something larger than themselves. Classical music had become a companion, a guide, and a teacher. It had opened a door to a world rich in emotion, history, and beauty. And though the journey had only begun, they knew that the 35 essential pieces they were discovering would accompany them through many moments of life, both joyful and challenging. The protagonist sat by the window. One evening, a soft light falling on their notes and recordings. They played one of the pieces from their growing collection, letting the music fill the room. A calmness settled over them, a feeling of completeness they had not known before. In that moment, they understood that the soul could find its home in the beauty of music, and that this was just the beginning of a lifelong journey of discovery, healing, and joy. The journey into the world of classical music grew deeper with each passing day. The protagonists found themselves increasingly curious about the composers, the history behind the music, and the emotions that had been captured in each piece. It was no longer just about listening. It was about understanding and feeling every note, every pause, every delicate variation. The music had become a guide to their inner world, a map of feelings that were hard to name but impossible to ignore. They began visiting libraries, searching for books about composers and the eras in which they had lived. They learned about Beethoven's struggles with deafness, Chopin's fragile health, and Bach's devotion to both his family and his music. Each story brought the music to life, revealing layers of human experience that resonated deeply. The protagonist was amazed at how personal challenges could be transformed into works that would speak to people centuries later at home. Their listening routine evolved. Mornings started with calm, gentle pieces to prepare for the day. Afternoons often featured dynamic symphonies that energized them, while evenings were reserved for reflective, soft music that encouraged introspection. The protagonist noticed how moods shifted with the music, how stress faded, and how a sense of peace took its place. They began to document these changes in a journal, noting which pieces lifted their spirits, which soothed their worries, and which awakened a deep, unspoken emotion. Friends and colleagues started noticing the change. Conversations about work or routine were replaced by discussions about music, emotions, and the stories behind the compositions. Sometimes, they played music during gatherings, watching as others were drawn in, moved, and even brought to tears by the melodies. The protagonist realized that music had a universal language, one that connected people beyond words, culture, or age. It was a bond that united strangers in shared emotion. In their exploration, the protagonist began to experiment with learning to play a few pieces on a keyboard they had brought home. It was not about mastery or skill, but about connecting more intimately with the music. The first attempts were clumsy, fingers stumbling over keys, notes sometimes missed, but each attempt was rewarding. Playing even a simple melody created a profound sense of accomplishment and understanding. They began to sense the patience, discipline, and dedication required by the composers themselves. With each new discovery, the protagonist's list of essential pieces grew. They realized that these 35 pieces were not just favorites, but reflections of different aspects of their life, moments of joy, periods of struggle, and instances of reflection. Each piece became a companion for a specific feeling or time of day. Some were energetic, demanding attention and engagement. Others were quiet and meditative, perfect for contemplation. The protagonist marveled at how the music could shape not only their day, but their entire perspective on life. Music also inspired other areas of their life. They began writing, drawing, and even walking in new ways, observing life with the attentiveness and sensitivity that music had taught them. Small details, a leaf fluttering in the wind, the pattern of clouds. The sound of rain took on new meaning, often reminding them of a particular melody or composition. Life itself became musical, filled with rhythms, harmonies, and subtle cadences. Yet the journey was not without challenges. Some compositions were difficult to grasp. They seemed chaotic or overwhelming at first. The protagonist would listen, become frustrated, then stop, only to return later with a fresh perspective. Over time, patience and repeated listening revealed the beauty hidden within complexity. They learned to appreciate tension and release, to understand how silence could speak as powerfully as sound, and to feel the emotions that the music had been crafted to evoke. A mentor entered their life during this time. A fellow music enthusiast they met at a local concert. This person had studied music extensively and shared insights that were transformative. They explained the nuances of different styles, the significance of certain compositions, and the cultural context behind the music. Their guidance helped the protagonist develop a deeper understanding, allowing them to move beyond just listening to truly experiencing the music. Each concert attended together became a journey with shared observations, reflections, and emotions. The protagonist also began to attend live performances, experiencing the music in ways that recordings could never replicate. The resonance of a full orchestra, the subtle variations introduced by musicians. The energy of the audience, all of it heightened the emotional experience. Sitting in the concert hall, they felt a sense of belonging, as if they were part of something timeless and universal. It was a reminder that music was alive, evolving, and intimately connected to human life. Through this process, they started sharing their experiences online, writing about the pieces, the emotions they evoked, and the stories of the composers. Readers responded, sharing their own experiences and emotions. A small community formed, drawn together by the love of classical music. The protagonist realized that music was not only a personal journey, but a communal one, where experiences could be shared, understood, and celebrated collectively. The more they explored, the more they understood that classical music was not just a series of notes, but a reflection of humanity itself. It expressed grief, joy, love, struggle, triumph, and peace. The protagonist saw how each piece, whether calm or dramatic, intimate or grand, carried the essence of human experience. They felt a connection not only to the composers, but to everyone who had listened, played, or been moved by the music over centuries. By the end of this period, the protagonist's life had changed profoundly. They were calmer, more empathetic, and more engaged with the world around them. The stress and restlessness that had once dominated their days were replaced by curiosity, appreciation, and a sense of purpose. The list of 35 essential pieces was taking shape, each entry carefully chosen for the unique way it resonated with their soul. These pieces were not just music, they were companions, teachers, and mirrors reflecting the depths of their own heart. Sitting by the window one rainy afternoon, listening to a recording of a symphony that had always felt distant until now, the protagonist smiled. They realized that music had given them more than enjoyment. It had given them understanding, peace, and a way to connect deeply with life and with others. The journey was only beginning, and the 35 pieces would guide them through countless experiences, shaping the rest of their days. In that quiet moment, they felt grateful, content, and fully alive, ready to continue the journey of discovery, one note at a time. The protagonist's connection to classical music had reached a new level. Each day was now colored by melodies, rhythms, and harmonies that seemed to speak directly to their heart. The 35 essential pieces were becoming more than just a personal list. They were companions, providing comfort, guidance, and insight into the human experience. Music was now a source of strength, a way to understand feelings that words could not capture. Life, however, was not without its challenges. The protagonist faced a particularly difficult period at work. With mounting responsibilities and pressures that seemed impossible to manage, tension and worry were constant companions, and old feelings of restlessness began to creep back. But this time, the protagonist turned to music instead of letting anxiety take over. A recording of a serene piano piece would play as they worked, helping to calm the mind, while an uplifting symphony would provide energy and motivation. Music was no longer a background sound. It was an active tool for navigating life's difficulties. One evening, after a long day, they sat in the dim light of their room, listening to a recording of Tchaikovsky's symphony, No. 6. The deep, mournful melodies were both painful and comforting. Tears came unbidden, not from sadness alone, but from a profound recognition of human emotion. It was as if the music acknowledged struggles, understood grief, and offered a way to process it. In that moment, the protagonist realized that music had the power to heal, to transform pain into understanding. And to create a space for reflection, they began to spend more intentional time with each piece, listening slowly, taking notes, and exploring the emotions it evoked. The journal that had started as a casual record now became a detailed reflection of their inner world. Each entry explored feelings, memories, and thoughts connected to a piece, creating a living map of emotional growth. The protagonist saw patterns emerge. Certain composers helped with introspection, others with motivation, and some with joy. Music had become both a mirror and a guide. The protagonist also began to notice how music influenced interactions with others. Conversations became more meaningful, patience grew, and empathy deepened. They would share a piece that had touched them and watch as friends experience the same emotional resonance. Some were surprised by how much a composition could move them, and the protagonist found joy in guiding others through the same journey. Music, once personal, had become a bridge connecting hearts and minds. A particular turning point came when the protagonist attended a chamber music concert alone. The hall was small, intimate, and filled with people who shared the same love for music. As the performers began, the room seemed to hold its breath. The nuances of live performance, the subtle shifts in tempo, the delicate touch of the bow on strings. The collective breath of the musicians created an experience that recordings could never replicate. Each note seemed to carry the emotions of the composers directly into the listeners' hearts. During the performance, the protagonist felt a wave of emotions. There was joy, sadness, awe, and gratitude, all at once. They realized that music could capture the complexities of life more effectively than words ever could. The applause at the end was not just for the performers, but for the shared experience. The invisible bond created between everyone present. The protagonist left the hall feeling enriched, as if they had participated in something timeless and profoundly human. Back at home, protagonists began exploring the technical aspects of music. They learned about harmony, melody, rhythm, and counterpoint, gaining a deeper appreciation for the skill and creativity required by the composers. This knowledge did not diminish the emotional experience. Rather, it enhanced it. Understanding how a chord progression worked, or why a composer chose a particular sequence, added layers of meaning. The protagonist saw that music was both art and science, emotion and intellect. Simplicity and complexity intertwined. Their collection of recordings, once small, grew to include rare performances, historic recordings, and interpretations by different orchestras and musicians. Each version of a piece offered a new perspective, a fresh emotional experience. The protagonist noticed how slight changes in tempo or emphasis could alter the feeling entirely. It was a lesson in the diversity of expression, a reminder that beauty often lies in subtlety and nuance. Inspired by this new depth of understanding, the protagonists started to experiment with sharing their knowledge in a creative way. They wrote reflections on each piece, explaining why it mattered, what emotions it evoked, and what insights could be drawn. These writings were shared online and gradually attracted an audience of fellow music lovers. People responded with their own experiences, creating a dialogue that enriched everyone involved. The protagonist discovered the joy of contributing to a community united by the love of music. One day, while listening to a particularly moving nocturne, the protagonist was struck by the universality of emotion in music. The feelings conveyed had no language barriers, no cultural limitations, no time constraints. Composers who had lived centuries ago could communicate directly with their heart, and listeners from the present could respond. It was a profound realization. Music transcended time and space, connecting human souls in ways nothing else could. This realization changed how the protagonist approached life. Challenges were faced with patience, emotions were acknowledged rather than suppressed, and moments of joy were cherished fully. Music provided a lens through which to view the world, encouraging mindfulness, empathy, and gratitude. Even ordinary tasks became infused with significance when paired with a carefully chosen piece of music. As the 35 essential pieces continued to take shape, the protagonist saw them as a personal journey of transformation. Each composition represented a milestone discovery: learning, healing, joy, reflection. They were not just songs, but markers of growth and understanding. Revisiting them allowed the protagonist to track progress, relive moments of insight, and reconnect with emotions that might otherwise be forgotten. Through all of this, the protagonist remained humble. They knew there was still much to explore, countless compositions yet unheard, and infinite emotional experiences waiting to be discovered. Music was a lifelong teacher, offering lessons in resilience, empathy, and the depth of human feeling. The protagonist felt gratitude not only for the beauty of the pieces themselves, but for the journey they had undertaken, one that had changed their perspective, enriched their life, and connected them more deeply to the world and the people in it. Sitting quietly one evening, listening to a symphony that had once seemed distant and complex, the protagonist realized how far they had come. The restlessness and emptiness of the past had been replaced by understanding, presence, and a sense of belonging. The music had taught patience, empathy, and emotional literacy, transforming the way they lived, felt, and interacted with others. It was clear that the journey of these 35 essential pieces was not just about music. It was about life, growth, and the enduring power of human emotion. In that moment, the protagonist felt a quiet, profound joy, knowing that the music would continue to guide, inspire, and heal for the rest of their days. The protagonist's love for classical music had grown into something larger than themselves. It was no longer just a personal journey, but a bridge to others, a way to connect hearts and minds through shared emotion. The 35 essential pieces had become more than a collection. They were a language, a way to communicate feelings that words often failed to capture. Each piece held a story, a memory, and a lesson, and sharing them with others became an important part of life. It began with small gestures. They would invite friends to listen together, choosing a quiet space and playing a single piece with intention. At first, the friends were curious but skeptical. Classical music had seemed distant and formal to them, something that belonged in concert halls or history books. But as the first notes played, a hush fell over the group. The beauty of the melodies, the depth of the harmonies, and the emotion woven into every phrase created a moment of shared stillness. Some smiled, some closed their eyes, a few were even moved to tears. The protagonist noticed these reactions and felt a sense of fulfillment. Music, they realized, had the power to bring people together in ways conversation could not. It was a shared experience, universal and timeless, capable of touching souls regardless of background, age, or circumstance. They began organizing small listening gatherings, sometimes with just a few friends, and other times inviting strangers from online communities they had joined. Each meeting was a discovery, both of music and of human emotion. During one such gathering, an elderly neighbor arrived. She had lived through difficult times and rarely spoke about her feelings. When a soft piano piece began, she quietly held the protagonist's hand, tears glistening in her eyes. The protagonist understood immediately. The music had unlocked something long hidden, offering comfort and recognition. In that moment, they felt the profound power of shared listening, how music could connect people across generations, bridging the gaps created by life's struggles and distance. Encouraged by these experiences, the protagonist began to explore ways to share music more widely. They created curated playlists featuring the 35 essential pieces, each accompanied by a short note explaining its significance and the emotions it evoked. They posted these online, inviting others to listen and reflect. Responses began to pour in stories of healing, joy, nostalgia, and gratitude. People from different parts of the world shared how the music had touched them, creating a ripple effect that went far beyond the protagonist's immediate circle. The protagonist also began attending larger community events. Local music societies, library concerts, and small festivals became venues where they could connect with like-minded individuals. Conversations flowed easily. A shared appreciation for the music opened doors to deeper discussions about life, challenges, and emotions. Through these interactions, the protagonist discovered the richness of community and the role music played in creating bonds that transcended ordinary social barriers. One afternoon, they visited a local school to participate in a music appreciation workshop. Children gathered, curious and lively, not always attentive at first. But as the first notes of a simple but expressive piece played, their eyes widened, and silence spread across the room. The protagonist guided them in listening, asking them to notice the shifts in tempo, the changes in volume, and the emotions they felt. Slowly, the children began to express their own interpretations, describing colors, stories, and feelings evoked by the music. The protagonist realized that even the youngest minds could connect deeply with classical compositions, and that sharing music was also a form of education and emotional development. Throughout these experiences, the protagonist reflected on the transformative power of music. They remembered how, in the early days, classical music had seemed distant and difficult to understand. Now it had become a bridge to others, a way to share insights and emotions. The 35 essential pieces were no longer just a personal guide, they were tools for creating empathy, understanding, and connection. The protagonist felt a sense of purpose, knowing that music could make life more meaningful for both themselves and those they touched. Even in moments of solitude, music played a role in shaping the protagonist's interactions with the world. They noticed the way a gentle melody could soften their reactions, encouraging patience and kindness in situations that once caused frustration. A powerful symphony could inspire courage and determination when challenges arose. Music had become a lens through which the protagonist viewed life, teaching lessons in humility, gratitude, and resilience. One evening, after a community concert, the protagonist walked home under a sky painted with the colors of sunset. The melodies from the performance lingered in their mind, creating a sense of calm and completeness. They thought about all the people they had met, the stories they had shared, the moments of connection music had fostered. It was clear that classical music was more than art, it was a living, breathing force that had the power to change lives, including their own. The protagonist also discovered that sharing music was not limited to live events or gatherings. Simple acts, like sending a friend a link to a recording that had moved them, or explaining the emotional context of a piece, could have a profound impact. These small gestures built understanding and empathy, demonstrating the quiet but powerful influence of music in daily life. Even when apart, people could feel connected through shared listening thoughts and reflections as they reflected on their journey. The protagonist realized that music had taught them the importance of attention and presence. Listening required focus, patience, and openness. It was not something to be rushed or distracted from. This awareness carried into other areas of life, improving relationships, work, and personal growth. Music had become a practice, a discipline, and a philosophy that shaped how they lived, felt, and interacted with others. Through all of this, the protagonists continued to refine their list of 35 essential pieces. Each composition had a story, a lesson, and an emotional resonance that made it indispensable. Some pieces reminded them of joy, others of sorrow, still others of hope, reflection, or courage. Collectively, the pieces formed a guide to the human experience, offering insight, comfort, and inspiration in ways that were both personal and universal. In quiet moments, the protagonist would sit by the window, listening to a recording that had once seemed simple, but now revealed layers of complexity and emotion. They thought about the countless people who had been touched by the music, both directly and indirectly. The realization that these compositions could continue to inspire comfort and connect people long after their creation filled the protagonist with gratitude and awe. Music had become a companion, a teacher, and a connector. It had transformed not only the protagonist's inner life, but also their relationships and their understanding of the world. Sharing the 35 essential pieces had opened doors to new friendships, community experiences, and personal insights. Each note carried meaning, each melody carried emotion, and each experience reinforced the enduring power of classical music. By the end of this phase of the journey, the protagonist felt a profound sense of purpose. Music was no longer just a personal refuge. It was a gift to share, a bridge between hearts and minds. The 35 essential pieces were markers of growth, empathy, and connection, guiding not only the protagonist, but also those willing to listen, reflect, and feel. In the quiet of an evening, with a favorite piece playing softly in the background, the protagonist understood that classical music was more than sound. It was life, emotion, and soul, capable of touching hearts in ways that words alone never could. The final part of the protagonist's journey with classical music brought a sense of reflection, fulfillment, and enduring connection. By now, the 35 essential pieces had become companions, teachers, and guides through life's complexities. Each composition held a story, a lesson, and an emotional resonance that shaped the way the protagonist experienced the world. Music had moved from a personal refuge to a universal language that connected them with people, history, and the deeper currents of life. Life continued with its challenges, but the protagonists faced them differently now. Difficult days at work, moments of worry, or personal struggles no longer dominated their emotions. Instead, music provided a framework for understanding and processing feelings. A gentle piano piece in the morning set a calm tone for the day, while an energetic symphony in the afternoon offered motivation and focus. In the evenings, reflective compositions encouraged meditation and introspection. Music had become a rhythm to life, a way to harmonize with the world around them through sharing the music with others. The protagonist discovered the power of empathy. Friends, neighbors, and strangers responded to the compositions in ways that transcended words. Some were moved to tears, others to laughter or quiet contemplation. The protagonist realized that music had a unique ability to touch hearts directly, bypassing the barriers often created by language, culture, or personal history. Each shared experience deepened relationships, created lasting memories, and fostered understanding. One afternoon, they attended a special concert where multiple orchestras collaborated to perform a series of pieces that were part of their essential list. The hall was filled with anticipation and a palpable sense of connection among the audience. As the first notes rose, the protagonist felt a profound sense of unity with everyone present. Each note carried emotion, history, and intent, resonating in the hearts of all listeners. The experience reinforced the realization that music was not just sound. It was a living, breathing force that could move people collectively, bridging time and space. After the concert, the protagonist met several fellow music lovers. Conversations flowed effortlessly, centered on emotions, interpretations, and personal connections to the music. People shared stories of how certain pieces had helped them through challenges, inspired creativity, or provided comfort during times of loss. The protagonist felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility, recognizing that their own journey was part of a larger tapestry of human experience. Connected by music, the protagonist also reflected on their own growth. In the beginning, classical music had seemed distant, formal, and perhaps even intimidating. Now, it was intimate, accessible, and profoundly human. They had learned to listen deeply, to feel without judgment, and to appreciate both the complexity and simplicity of each composition. Music had taught patience, emotional awareness, and resilience. It had encouraged them to explore themselves and the world with curiosity and openness. Writing became a natural extension of this journey. The protagonist documented reflections on each of the 35 essential pieces. describing emotions, insights, and personal transformations. These writings were shared online, attracting a community of readers who found solace, inspiration, and understanding through the stories. Comments and messages revealed the ripple effect of music. How a single composition could comfort someone thousands of miles away, evoke memories, or spark creative expression. The protagonist was humbled to see how their personal journey could touch the lives of others. One quiet evening, the protagonist played a favorite nocturne, letting the music flow through the room. They closed their eyes, feeling the familiar surge of emotion, the ebb and flow of melody, the dialogue between notes. Each phrase seemed to speak directly to their soul, acknowledging past struggles, celebrating growth, and offering hope for the future. In that moment, they understood that music had become a mirror, reflecting both the inner and outer worlds, offering insight, comfort, and inspiration. They also observed how music influenced daily life beyond listening sessions. Even mundane tasks like cooking, cleaning, or walking through the neighborhood carried new significance when paired with the right composition. Music heightened awareness, deepened appreciation for the ordinary, and created moments of joy and reflection. The protagonist realized that classical music was not separate from life, it was life, providing rhythm, meaning, and emotional depth to every experience. Through sharing and listening, the protagonist noticed a profound sense of responsibility. The 35 essential pieces were not merely a personal collection, they were a legacy, a way to preserve and transmit human emotion and creativity. Each piece carried centuries of history, struggle, and triumph. And sharing them allowed others to access the same insights, comfort, and inspiration. The protagonists saw themselves as a guide, helping others connect to the timeless wisdom and beauty embedded in music. Teaching and mentoring became a natural next step. The protagonist organized small workshops, guiding others to listen deeply, understand emotion, and appreciate the stories behind compositions. Participants of all ages learned to observe, reflect, and share their experiences. Children discovered that music could be playful and expressive, while adults found solace and clarity. Each session reinforced the idea that music was not only a personal refuge but a universal bridge, connecting people across generations and cultures, reflecting on the journey as a whole. The protagonist recognized the transformation music had facilitated. What began as a casual curiosity had grown into a lifelong companion, shaping perception, emotion, and action. The 35 essential pieces were milestones in a journey of self-discovery, healing, and connection. Music had taught them to listen with attention, respond with empathy, and live with awareness. It had created a space for both solitude and shared experience, offering lessons that extended beyond the notes themselves in moments of quiet reflection. The protagonist often revisited the earliest pieces they had discovered. Listening again, they noticed subtleties they had missed, emotions they had not fully felt, and new layers of meaning. This deepened their appreciation for the evolving nature of music and life. Just as their understanding of themselves and the world had grown, so too had the depth of emotion and insight that each composition offered. The protagonist also thought about the future. Music was endless. There were countless compositions yet to hear, interpretations yet to explore, and experiences yet to feel. The 35 essential pieces were a foundation, core that would guide them through life's challenges, joys, and contemplations. They were a touchstone, a constant companion, and a reminder that beauty, emotion, and humanity could be accessed through dedication, attention, and openness. In the final reflection of this journey, the protagonist understood that classical music was not merely entertainment or art. It was a mirror, a guide, and a teacher. It offered lessons in patience, empathy, resilience, and presence. It connected past, present, and future, allowing listeners to experience centuries of human emotion and creativity. Through the 35 essential pieces, the protagonist had found not only solace and inspiration, but also a way to connect deeply with others and with themselves. Sitting in a quiet room, the protagonist played a symphony that had always felt profound. As the music filled the space, They felt gratitude for the journey, for the discoveries, and for the countless moments of insight, comfort, and joy. They knew that the music would continue to guide, inspire, and heal for the rest of their life. Each note was a testament to the power of human expression, each melody a bridge between hearts, and each composition a reminder that the soul could find its voice in the beauty of classical music. With a serene smile, the protagonists closed their eyes, letting the final notes resonate, feeling fully alive, fully connected, and fully at peace.